HR mandated quiet hours to protect our mental health, but they forgot one thing. I'm the only person who knows how to keep this company from collapsing. They wanted a culture of wellness. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. I used to think that being the best at my job meant being indispensable. I worked as a senior site reliability engineer for a global fintech firm, which is a fancy way of saying I was the person who kept the digital plumbing from exploding while everyone else slept. My life wasn't measured in hours or days, but in uptime percentages and millisecond latencies. When a server went down in Singapore at 3 in the morning, my phone screamed. When a database hung in London at noon on a Sunday, I was there. I took pride in that. I felt like a guardian. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being the person everyone relies on to prevent disaster. You become a ghost in your own life, haunting your own home while staring at glowing lines of code. My wife stopped asking me how my day was because she already knew. It was busy, it was stressful, and I wouldn't be able to talk about it until tomorrow. The shift happened slowly, then all at once. It started with a memo from Human Resources regarding a work-life harmony and digital wellness. The language was soft, wrapped in layers of corporate kindness that felt like a slap in the face. They talked about preventing burnout. They talked about the importance of disconnecting to foster creativity. And then came the new policy, mandatory quiet hours, from 7:00 p.m. to 7:00 m. Employees were strictly prohibited from checking work communications or responding to non-emergency pings. HR claimed it was for our own mental health. Management agreed because they wanted to see increased engagement during core business hours. What they didn't say was that this policy made my job impossible without creating a massive liability for the company. In my world, there is no such thing as a non-emergency when you are managing high-frequency trading, data and global payment gateways. If a server goes down at 8:00 p.m., it doesn't stay down until 7:00 m. The money stops moving. The clients start calling. The company loses millions every minute the lights are off. I brought this up in 3 different meetings. I sat with my manager, Dave, a man who had spent his entire career climbing ladders by saying exactly what people wanted to hear. I showed him the logs. I showed him the projected loss per hour if we ignored an outage during quiet hours. He smiled at me, that patronizing, sympathetic smile that makes you want to scream, and told me that the system is designed with redundancy. He told me the automated failovers would handle everything. He told me the junior engineers were trained to monitor the alerts during those hours. What he didn't realize was that the junior engineers are often on call too, but they aren't allowed to be distracted by their phones if they aren't officially clocked in for a shift. The company had created a legal loophole where they wouldn't pay overtime for on-call responses unless it was a Tier 1 disaster. But they also forbade the very actions needed to prevent those disasters from escalating into Tier 1 events. The resentment didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow boil. It was the feeling of being woken up at midnight by a vibration on my nightstand, only to realize it wasn't an emergency. Just a check-in from a project manager who wanted to know if I'd seen a memo. It was the exhaustion that settled into my bones when I realized I was being punished for being dedicated. The turning point came on a Tuesday. I was at dinner with my wife, a rare occurrence. We were finally having a conversation about our summer plans, something normal and human, when my phone buzzed against the table. It wasn't a text. It was a high-priority system alert from our primary database cluster in Frankfurt. The error code was clear: fatal disk failure. This meant the redundancy had failed. The failover hadn't kicked in because of a configuration error I had flagged 3 months ago and been told was not a priority for this quarter. I reached for my phone. My heart already racing, but then I remembered the memo. HR had sent out a warning that morning. They were monitoring Slack activity and response times to promote wellness culture. If I responded now, if I logged in and fixed it during quiet hours, it would be flagged as a violation of the new policy. In our recent performance reviews, they had started using adherence to corporate wellness initiatives as a metric for professional conduct. I looked at my wife. She saw the look in my eyes. She knew. Just fix it, she whispered. It's just work. But it wasn't just work anymore. It was the principle. If I fixed it, I was acknowledging that their policy worked. I was agreeing that a multi-million-dollar outage was a fair price to pay for my wellness. I was validating the idea that my time and my expertise were secondary to a HR spreadsheet designed to make the company look compassionate on LinkedIn. I put the phone face down on the table. My hands were shaking, not from fear of the crash, but from a cold, crystalline rage. The outage happened. I could see it in the silence of our dinner. Then came the frantic texts from my manager at 10:30 p.m. Not asking me to fix it, but asking why I hadn't acknowledged the automated alert. I'm observing quiet hours, I texted back. It was the most honest thing I have ever written. Per HR policy, I am disconnected for my mental well-being. The fallout from that night was massive. The Frankfurt outage cost the company nearly $4 million in missed transactions and client penalties. Dave called me into his office the next morning. He didn't look sympathetic this time. He looked angry. He told me that while he understood my point, my refusal to act was a breach of my contract and showed a lack of team spirit. We can work through policy hiccups, he said, leaning over his desk. But we need people who are committed to the mission. That's when I realized something very important. They didn't want me to fix things. They wanted me to be a safety net that they could ignore whenever it was convenient for their budget or their metrics. They wanted the benefits of my expertise without the cost of my presence. They had turned my passion into a liability and my dedication into a punchline. I didn't quit. Not immediately. Instead, I decided to give them exactly what they asked for. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a model employee. I was the most compliant person in the building. At 6:59 p.m. I would close my laptop with a smile. At 7:01 am, I would log on and greet everyone with cheerful professionalism. If an alert came in at night, I didn't even look at my phone. I would let it sit there, glowing on the nightstand like a dying star, while I slept deeply and peacefully. But I wasn't just ignoring the alerts. I was being much more thorough in my obedience. You see, when you are a senior site reliability engineer, you don't just watch the monitors. You build the logic that tells those monitors what is important. You write the rules for what constitutes an emergency. I spent my working hours meticulously reviewing our alerting hierarchy. I looked at every single rule, every threshold, and every escalation path, and in doing so, I found a way to make the system perfectly align with HR's new vision of wellness. If a server is under heavy load, it's not an emergency. It's just high activity. If a service latency increases by 500 milliseconds, it's a performance fluctuation and not an outage. If a database connection pool is reaching its limit, that's just a resource utilization. I didn't turn anything off. I didn't break anything. That would be a violation of my contract and grounds for immediate firing. Instead, I simply reclassified everything. I moved every single high-priority alert, the ones that require immediate human intervention to prevent catastrophe, into the low-priority/non-urgent category. These were alerts that, by design, do not trigger a phone call or an SMS. They merely send a quiet email to a shared inbox that is only checked during business hours. I also implemented a new noise reduction protocol. It was presented to management as a way to reduce alert fatigue, a term they absolutely loved because it sounded like it was about mental health. The goal, I told them, was to ensure engineers weren't being interrupted by meaningless notifications during their focus time. They approved it within 20 minutes. I felt like an architect of my own salvation. For the first month, life was incredible. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't waking up in the middle of the night. My marriage healed because I was actually present at the table. Had more energy than I'd had in years. And the company thought everything was running smoothly. After all, the dashboard showed green. It showed a beautiful, steady, tranquil green. But it was a lie. The green on the dashboard didn't mean the systems were healthy. It meant that we had redefined healthy to mean not currently screaming. We were flying an airplane where every warning light had been taped over with a smiley face because the pilot said the lights were too stressful to look at. The explosion happened on a Friday afternoon, just before a long holiday weekend. It started with a minor data drift in our primary payment processor. In the old system, this would have triggered a Tier 1 alert within seconds. Under my new quiet hours and noise reduction protocols, it was categorized as a systemic trend observation. It sent an email to a folder that no one looks at unless they are specifically looking for trends. By Saturday morning, the data drift had become a full-scale synchronization failure. The servers were still running, which is why the dashboard stayed green. But they weren't actually talking to each other. They were shouting into a void. The company's largest client, a massive international retail chain that processed millions of transactions every hour, realized something was wrong around noon on Saturday. Their transactions were failing at a rate of 40%. By 2:00 p.m., their entire checkout system went dark. By Saturday evening, the green dashboard finally turned red. But it was too late for the automated failover to save us. Because they had reclassified the failure as a low-priority resource mismatch, the system didn't attempt to reroute traffic to the backup servers. It simply sat there, waiting for an engineer to acknowledge the email. I spent Saturday night at a movie theater with my wife. We were halfway through a comedy when my phone finally buzzed. It wasn't a high-priority alert, because I had moved everything to low priority. The system didn't even try to call me. It just sent a standard, non-urgent notification, system status update. Resource mismatch detected in Frankfurt cluster. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at my wife, who was laughing at something on the big screen. "Everything okay?" she asked when the credits began to roll and we walked out into the cool night air. "Perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect. Total peace of mind." The fallout from the great Saturday silence was unlike anything the company had ever seen. It wasn't just a glitch, it was a total blackout. By Sunday morning, when the Monday morning shift arrived and saw the wreckage, they realized that the systems hadn't failed due to hardware or software bugs. They had failed because no one had been told there was a problem. The post-mortem investigation was intense. It lasted weeks. Forensic auditors went through every log, every change request, and every configuration update from the last 3 months. They were looking for a malicious actor, a hacker, or a catastrophic hardware failure. They found my changes. They found that I had systematically downgraded the severity of every critical alert in the system. They found the noise reduction protocol and saw how it had effectively silenced the company's immune system. I was called into an emergency meeting with Dave, the head of engineering, the chief technology officer, and a representative from legal. The room was cold. They didn't offer me water. They didn't ask about my wellness. Explain this, the CTO said. He held up a printout of my configuration changes. It looked like a death warrant. I sat there, calm, my hands folded on the table. I had practiced this moment in my head every night for a week. It's exactly what you asked for, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any anger. We implemented the mandatory quiet hours. We prioritized employee mental health and work-life harmony. We worked hard to eliminate alert fatigue and ensure that engineers weren't being distracted by non-urgent interruptions. I simply tuned the system to match your corporate policy. You sabotaged the company, Dave shouted. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was blotchy, his eyes bloodshot. The wellness benefits of the new policy were clearly not working for him. I didn't sabotage anything, I replied. The system functioned exactly as it was configured. If a critical failure is classified as a low-priority observation, then by definition, it is no longer an emergency. And if it isn't an emergency, according to HR policy, we are prohibited from responding to it during quiet hours. I followed the rules to the letter. The legal representative leaned forward. You knew this would happen. You knew that by downgrading these alerts, you were creating a window of vulnerability. And I suspected it, I said. But I also trusted management's assurances. When I raised concerns about the risks of quiet hours, I was told that our redundancy systems and our junior staff would handle any issues. I was told that my dedication to wellness was a metric for my performance. So I focused on my wellness. I ensured that no one, not even me, was disturbed during prohibited hours. There was a long silence. The CTO looked at the printout, then at me. He saw it. He realized that I hadn't broken a single rule. I had simply used their own rules to create a reality where they could no longer control the chaos they had tried to legislate away. They fired me, of course. It was immediate. They couldn't keep me on staff, even if they wanted to, without admitting in court that their own policies were the cause of their multi-million-dollar loss. As I was packing my things, Dave came by my desk. He looked broken. The team spirit he had been so fond of talking about seemed to have evaporated. You couldn't have just warned us more forcefully, he asked quietly. You could have made it a bigger deal in the meetings. I looked at him and smiled. The same patronizing, sympathetic smile he had given me months ago. I did warn you, Dave. I just stopped making it your problem. It was time for my mental health to come first. I walked out of that building with nothing but a small box of my things and a profound sense of lightness. A week later, I heard through a former colleague that a company had scrapped the quiet hours policy entirely. They also reinstated the old on-call compensation structure, which included massive bonuses for responding to midnight emergencies. They even hired an expensive consulting firm to rebuild the culture of accountability. But they didn't call me back. Why would they? I was the man who showed them that you can't demand silence and then get angry when everything goes quiet. Now I work for a much smaller startup. The pay isn't as high, but the hours are my own. Sometimes in the middle of the night, my phone will buzz on the nightstand. My heart might jump, just for a split second. But then I remember who I am. I check the time. If it's past 7, I reach over, turn the phone face down, and go right back to sleep. After all, I need to maintain my wellness.